Thank you very much. As the title suggests, the topic of my presentation is sparse estimation, grid-free sparse estimation, and more precisely, variational regularization techniques that allow to perform this estimation. So I'd like to present you some new topics and results in this domain that have started being investigated around that have started being investigated around 2012 and that are sometimes referred to as grid-free or off-the-grid sparse regularization techniques. So before diving into the core of the subject, I would just like as an introduction to recall what is classical sparse estimation and why is it useful. So you are given some vector x0 which is assumed to be sparse, meaning that it has a lot of non-zero, only a very few non-zero coefficients. This vector x0 is actually unknown, and in a typical sparse estimation scenario, what you're interested in is in trying to recover this unknown vector x0 from a set of noisy, possibly noisy linear measurements. So these linear measurements are actually the image of your unknown vector x0 by some measurement matrix A, and again, in a typical sparse estimation scenario, y0, the linear observations you have access to, have much less coefficients than x0, meaning that the measurement matrix you have at your disposal has way more columns than rows. So, in a way, recovering x0 from these observations y0, it amounts to solve a severely underdetermined linear system. There are infinitely many vector x that satisfy a of x equal y0, and the whole goal is really to select, to retrieve among all these vector x, the sparse vector x0 which is unknown. And the key ingredient in doing so, to achieve this, is really the sparsity assumption on x0, the assumption that it has only very few non-zero coefficients. And you can complexify the problem a bit, trying to recover this time x0 from some noisy version of y0, which is y0 plus some noise vector w. So this sparse estimation problem has been investigated first around the 70s and then later on more extensively in the 90s. And a family of very popular methods for performing this reconstruction of x0 from these possibly noisy linear measurements are so-called variational methods. So they consist in taking the observations you have at your disposal, either y0 or y, and plugging them into a well-chosen optimization problem whose solutions are expected to give you good approximations of x0. So typically what you would do in the case of the noiseless problem is that you will look at all the vectors x solutions of your underdetermined linear system and select among them the ones which minimize this criterion, the L1 norm, which is just the sum of the absolute values of the coordinates of your vector. And the minimization of this L1 norm is known to promote minimizers that are indeed sparse, that have very few non-zero coefficients. And there is a whole theory that has been developed to ensure that under suitable assumptions, you can hope that x0 is actually the unique solution of this L1 minimization constraint problem here. Now, if you have access to y instead of y0, these noisy observations, then it does not make sense to impose this hard constraint a of x equal y anymore. Even x0 wouldn't be admissible. So instead, one would typically solve the following celebrated optimization problem, which is known as the lasso in statistics or basis pursuit denoising in signal processing. So you still minimize an L1 norm, but instead of having this hard constraint here, you have a penalization which forces minimizers to yield observations that are similar to those you have at your disposal, the noisy observations y. And the regularization parameter lambda here allows you to give more or less weight to the L1 term. And in the limit lambda going to 0, at least formally, you recover this constraint problem here in the limit. Okay, so why is this sparse estimation problem useful? Well, it has a tremendous number of applications, as you might know. First, in imaging, in signal processing, there are lots of situations in which you're interested in recovering some signal that can be faithfully modeled as sparse vector. So it could be, this signal could be neural spikes in brain imaging, could also be an arrangement of stars in astronomical imaging. And in all these scenarios, the signal you want to recover, you don't directly have access to it. The sensing device that you use, a telescope, a microscope, a camera, only gives you access to some noisy partial linear measurements on this signal. And these linear observations could be related to the discrete Fourier transform of your vector x0, or a subset of this discrete Fourier transform, to the convolution with some discrete blur kernel, etc., etc. And being able to recover x0 from the knowledge of these noisy observations y allow you to overcome the physical limitations of your sensing device to really faithfully recover your signal of interest despite let's say the partial measurements and the noise you could have on your observations. Then second application in statistics, sparse estimation is also useful to perform feature selection in linear models. So assume you have n pairs of training samples xi, yi, with xi a p-dimensional vector and yi a real value. Then if you want to explain the relationship between x and y using a linear model, which amounts to finding a vector of coefficients beta such that x beta is approximately equal to y, well, in the setting where you have p much larger than n, meaning that you have a large number of features but few data points, it makes sense to enforce the sparsity of your vector of coefficients beta here in order to really select the most relevant features in your linear model. And then the recovery of beta from these observations y, it fits into the framework I just described. And basically, when you solve the lasso for higher values of lambda from right to left, you see that the less relevant features, at least the coefficients related to this feature, are set to 0, and you only keep the most relevant features. So in this huge number of features, you are able to select the most relevant ones. Okay, so this what I would call discrete sparse estimation framework has some limitations. First, in statistics, the framework I just described only allows you to deal with linear models, which is a highly restrictive assumption. You might be interested in having more complex models to explain the relationship between x and y. And then in imaging, it often happens that the signal you're interested in recovering has some continuous nature, and recovering this signal under the form of a sparse vector, in some sense, amounts to discretizing the continuous domain on which your signal is defined. And you then are facing a trade-off. Either you take a very crude discretization of your continuous domain and you end up with discretization errors, or you discretize your continuous domain, the domain on which your signal lives, with a very fine grid, and then you will face both theoretical and numerical instabilities. So because of these limitations, around 2012, people started investigating the following problem. You don't try to recover a sparse vector from noisy linear measurements anymore, but instead a discrete measure, or sparse measure. That is a linear combination of a few Dirac masses. So that's what's called off-the-grid or grid-free sparse estimation. The grid-free term refers to the property that the signal you want to recover is still sparse in some sense. It's a linear combination of a few atoms, the Dirac masses, but the support of these atoms are not constrained to lie on some fixed discrete grid. And we'll see that this framework allows to deal with, well, basically to circumvent all these limitations. Okay, so let me just, so the first part of my presentation is going to be dedicated to this problem, this grid-free sparse estimation problem. And my presentation is based on two main references. The first one is a set of lecture notes by Clarisse Poon, which are available online. And the second one is a presentation by Gabriel Perret, which is also available at this address. So they contributed a lot to this grid-free sparse estimation, among other problems. Okay, so here is the setting. We give ourselves a domain X, which could either be a subset of Rd or the d-dimensional torus. And M of X denotes the set of bounded radon measures on X. So we are given some measure mu0, which is discrete, a linear combination of a few Dirac masses. And this measure is unknown. What we want to do is to recover it from a set of linear measurements, which are modeled as the image of this unknown measure mu0 by some continuous linear operator big phi. this measurement vector lies in some Hilbert space H. Usually, if you have access to M measurements, H will simply be the Euclidean space of dimension M. And so your linear, obtaining your linear observations from mu0 just amounts to integrating mu0 against an H-valued function phi, which defines your measurement operator. So how should you think of phi? Well, for example, phi could be the following. You take your measure, you compute its convolution with some Blur kernel, say the Gaussian kernel. So you obtain this red curve here. And this could be your observation. This, in this case, H would be the space, for example, of square integrable functions on X. And you assume you have access to the full convolution of your measure with the Blur kernel, and you might want to recover mu0. Or in a more practical scenario, maybe, you could have access instead to the full convolution to samples of this convolution on some discrete grid. So a vector like this one. In this case, you have M linear measurements and try to recover mu0 from these measurements. And again, you can complexify a bit the problem, trying to recover mu0 from some noisy version of this measurement vector y0, which is y. Okay, so applications. Well, first, in the field of imaging, this grid-free sparse estimation framework has a lot of natural applications. In some settings, the images you want to recover or the signals you want to recover could be, for example, superposition of point light sources. And in these cases, it's really natural to model this arrangement of point light sources as discrete measures. The atoms of the measures model the location of each light source, and the amplitudes model the strength of each of the light sources. So, for example, in astronomical imaging, you might want to record the light emitted by some stars and to accurately be able to locate them. So in this case, your discrete measure models your arrangement of stars in the sky. And the linear measurements you have access to, for example, could be in the setting of in the settings of radio interferometry. You have an array of telescopes that records the light emitted by the stars. These telescopes are separated by some distance, and when you combine, so each telescope receives a wave with some phase, depending on its location, and combining all the waves received by the telescope, you get access to some sampling of the Fourier transform of your measure. So that's the first example, radio interferometry in astronomical imaging. You try to recover some discrete measure from a subset of its Fourier transform. Second application, in biological imaging, and more specifically in fluorescence microscopy, people sometimes put some chemicals or some fluorophores in biological samples. And these fluorophores, when you send a laser onto them, they respond by emitting some light that you can record in order to try to get some information on the depth of each of the component of your biological sample. So you have a microscope, you send your laser, record the light emitted by the fluorophores, and you try to recover at which depth is each of the cells you want to observe actually located. And this problem, in a very idealized model, it actually corresponds to retrieving a discrete measure on the real half-line from a subset of its Laplace transform. So that's the second application. Now, yeah. Yeah. Yes. So that would be X, indeed, the continuous line. This would be the convolution of mu0 with some kernel. So you get a function on X, and basically what I just do is that I discretize X, I put some discrete grid over X, and I just evaluate this convolution on these discrete points. No, not a histogram, exactly, yeah, a subsampling of the convolution. You could imagine that each of these points on the grid is like the pixel of some camera that records all the lights that has been emitted around, and yeah, it gives you access to this. Yeah. So second application, statistics. A first application is estimation of parameters in mixture models. So let's consider the very idealized setting of univariate Gaussian mixtures. So I assume here basically the task is to recover a measure which is defined on the domain, which is your parameter space, the parameter space of your mixture model. So the set of means and variances. And basically, if you have a finite mixture of Gaussians, for example, of univariate Gaussians, then the parameters of your mixture model can be encoded in this discrete measure here. So each mi sigma I gives you the mean and variance of one of the components of the mixture, and the ai are actually the weight of each component in the mixture. And a first really idealized scenario could be that you observe the full distribution of the mixture, which is just the integral of your measure encoding the parameters of the mixture against this function here. So you assume that you have access to this full whole function here, and you try to recover the parameters of the model, the discrete measure mu0, from this joint distribution of the model. Of course, in practical scenario, you never have access to the full distribution of your mixture model. You rather have access to a sample, a set of RID samples drawn from it. And to still fit into the framework I just described, you can rely on the idea of sketching. So you take n samples drawn from your mixture model, and you can come up with a set of sketching functions theta k. And basically your observations in this setting are going to be the generalized moments of your joint distribution corresponding to the theta k, so just the integral of the theta k against the joint distribution of your mixture. And this, you can approximate them using empirical means thanks to your sample, and you get a finite number of observations from which you can try to recover the parameters of your mixture models. And we'll see in a few minutes that actually the whole analysis you can perform on this grid-free sparse estimation problem allows you to get some really nice insights on this parameter estimation problem in mixture models. Second application, I told you that linear predictors were a bit too restrictive, and it turns out that this grid-free sparse estimation framework allows you to fit more sophisticated models, such as two-layer neural networks with a single hidden layer. So assume you are given a set of n training pairs, Tj, Sj, and that you want to explain the relationship between T and S using this predictor here, which is just the predictor associated to a neural network with a single hidden layer. So basically you take your vector T, then your predictor, it computes some affine quantities depending on T, one for each of the neurons in the hidden layer. Then you compose the results you get with a nonlinear activation function, such as the ReLU function. You get the output of your hidden layer here, and then the output of the predictor is just a linear combination of the output of each neuron. So this is this predictor here, and basically training this neural network with a single hidden layer can be fits into a framework. It just amounts to recover this measure here, which is defined on the domain of basically the domain of your measure is the set of parameters of the hidden layers, and the weights in front of each atom of the measure is just one of the coefficients linking the output of the predictor with the output of the hidden layers. And basically your observations, they just correspond to the evaluation of your predictor at the training samples you have Tj. And okay, this might sound as a very toy example maybe at first, but this point of view has been extensively exploited by Francis Bach and Lena Ichisa, among others, in this work to derive some insights on the statistical properties of the predictors learned with a neural network with a single hidden layer in the infinite width limit, in the large number of neuron limits. So this is a work by Francis Bach, and they also tried to get insights on the dynamic of gradient descent while training these models in the infinite width limit. Okay, so now how do you perform this? Yes? So yeah, you want to recover these optimal parameters alpha I and beta I. Exactly, yeah. Yeah. The AIs, no, you also want to recover them. The AIs just model the relationship between the output of the predictor and the thing you get in the hidden layer. In some sense, the AI, they are different from the alpha I, beta I, sorry, because in some sense, these ones are linear parameters, and these ones are completely non-linear parameters. So that's why they really don't appear in the same place in the problem. Okay, so how do you perform this grid-free sparse estimation in practice? Well, you do exactly the same as with the discrete sparse estimation problem. You can do the same. There are other methods, but a way to do this is using variational methods. To recover mu0 from the knowledge of y0, you look among all the measures solutions of your severely underdetermined linear system, and you try to find the one which minimizes some well-chosen criterion. And it turns out that in this case, if you want to recover discrete measures, the good criterion to minimize is the total variation of measures, which is defined in this way. So if your measure has a density f with respect to the Lebesgue measure on your domain X, this total variation would just be the L1 norm of the density. If your measure is discrete with weights AI, this total variation is just the L1 norm of A. And just as the L1 norm in finite dimension promotes sparse minimizers, the total variation of measures promotes minimizers that are discrete measures. And again, if you have noise on your observations, you would rather solve this generalized lasso problem, which in this work, it was introduced in these two works, and it's been called the Berling lasso, the B lasso, Berling being a mathematician that studied some related problem in the 30s, I think. Yes? Mm-hmm. That's the weird part. When you optimize, you never assume that they are discrete. So that's why, in some sense, it corresponds to some infinite width limit. Infinite width limits. But under some not so restrictive assumptions, you can ensure that your problems here, they always have at least one solution, which is a discrete measure. It will be possibly made of a large number of atoms. As many as basically the condition to impose is that your vector y is finite dimensional, and in this case you can guarantee that there is at least one solution that is going to be a linear combination of m atoms, m being the size of y. So this would be a large number of atoms, but in lots of situations you really expect that you get a measure which is way sparser than this. But indeed, when you optimize, this optimization problem is really formulated over the infinite dimensional space of bounded Radon measures. So that's the first problem. I mean, how in practice can you solve these problems here is not completely clear. We'll see that you can do it efficiently in the end. But the really nice part of these problems here is that when you look at this problem here, the problem of recovering mu0 from the knowledge of phi of mu, then the relationship between the parameters alpha and beta and the observation is completely nonlinear. But here, when you model it as an operator, your observations on the space of measures, you get something completely linear. So it's, in some sense, your problem of optimizing, of training your neural network is completely non-convex. But if you lift it in the infinite dimensional space of Radon measures, you end up with a convex problem. So that's why you can get insights, interesting insights by doing so. Okay, so now that you've defined these variational methods, three natural questions usually arise. First, can you guarantee that mu0, your unknown measure, is the unique solution of the constrained total variation minimization problem? Then, if the noise on your observations is reasonable and you choose well your regularization parameter lambda, can you guarantee that solutions of this generalized lasso problem, the Berling lasso, are close to the solutions of the constraint problem? So having these two properties would give you some kind of noise robustness for your variational method, meaning that if the noise on your observation is small and you choose lambda well enough, then solving the generalized lasso problem would give you something close to mu0. And then can you in practice solve p lambda? Since it's infinite dimensional, it's not completely clear how to do it. So I would just like to provide a very broad overview of the results regarding these three questions. Yeah, so let's start with the first one. So I'll just deal with an idealized setting and discuss extensions afterwards. So imagine that the discrete measure you want to recover is actually a measure on the one-dimensional torus, and that your measurement operator gives you access to the Fourier transform of mu, and actually to the first to the low pass coefficients of your Fourier transform. So the first two fc+1 coefficients of the Fourier transform. So that's a really idealized setting. 1D case, periodic domain, and you assume you have these kind of observations. Then defining this delta to be the minimal separation distance between two atoms in the measure mu0, the minimum distance between xi and xj for I different from j. What you can prove is the following. If the amplitudes of your measure are positive, meaning that the AI are real numbers, positive real numbers, then if the cutoff frequency fc, which gives you in some sense the number of measurements, is not smaller than the number of atoms in your measure, then mu0 is the unique solution of the problem P0 I presented first. So this was proved in this paper here in 2012. But in the general case, if the amplitudes of your measure are real numbers with arbitrary signs or complex numbers, then you need a minimal separation distance between the atoms of your measure to be able to recover them. And this minimal separation distance is of the order 1 over fc, fc being again something close to the number of measurements you have access to. And in fact, this sufficient condition is almost necessary, as it has been shown here. The main, the really breakthrough result in the field of grid-free sparse estimation is really considered to be this result here, the result by Emmanuel Candes and Carlos Fernandez-Granda, showing that you can recover a discrete measure from a few Fourier samples, provided that you have a minimal separation distance between its atoms. And okay, so let's discuss a few extensions. You can extend, in a way, these results to account for the presence of noise in the observations. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's really hidden somewhere, and it's really yeah, basically the recoveries, the guarantees that you get. So from what I know, in traditional compressed sensing sparse estimation, you usually have a condition that imposes you that you must not have too much coherence between the elements of your dictionary. This is exactly hidden here. In some sense, your continuous dictionary, you can't really, when you have a continuous dictionary and you take in some sense, two measurements that are really close to each other, you will never have this incoherence assumption satisfied. So that's why, in some sense, you need this separation between atoms condition. I'm not sure if my explanation is completely clear, but it's hidden here. The dictionary is really the set. The dictionary is really the set of all the functions here, where x goes through the whole torus. So you have a continuous dictionary in some sense. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The dictionary of sparsity. So as I said, you can extend this result to account for the presence of noise in the observations. What you would get essentially is that under the same kind of conditions, if the noise on the observation is reasonably small, you will get, by solving the Berling-Lasso program, some measure that is close in some sense to mu0. So for example, this notion of close could be related to a partial optimal transport distance between mu0 and the solution of the lasso. This result here can be somewhat easily extended to higher dimensions and to other well-behaved measurement operators. This one here is much more complicated. There's a paper by Clarisse Poon and Gabriel Perret trying to do it, and it's not. I mean, you can still. The big picture is that you can still, assuming that you have positive amplitudes, hope for this result to hold, but the picture is a bit more complicated in higher dimensions. Concerning noise robustness, there is a very important result, in my opinion, that I would like to mention, which is due to Vincent Duval and Gabriel Perret. And this result, it tells you that under some assumptions that are related to the minimal separation distance assumptions that I just mentioned, in the low noise regime, the measure you recover by solving the Berling-Lasso actually has the exact same number of spikes as your unknown measure mu0. And the positions of these spikes, these atoms, they smoothly converge toward the correct when the noise goes to 0. So this is a very strong noise robustness result, telling you that it's a structure-preserving noise robustness result, telling you that you are able to exactly recover the size of the support of your unknown measure, and the location of the atoms are converging toward the correct ones when the noise goes to 0. And hidden here in the non-degenerate source condition, which is can be quite difficult to satisfy, is really this notion of either positive amplitude or separation condition if you have arbitrary amplitudes. And then let me just very briefly mention numerical methods for solving the Berling-Lasso. So the first family of methods, there are really plenty others, some very specific to measurement operators, but some much more general, so I chose to focus on general methods. One basically amounts to, is an iterative algorithm. It starts with a zero measure, and at each iteration you compute some function based on the previous iterate on the observation you have at your disposal, and add a new Dirac mass at some position given by the solution of this problem here. And this gives you the following kind of algorithm. You add a spike at each iteration, perform some local refinement if you want, and at the end you end up with something with a faithful approximation of your unknown measure. Second kind of algorithm, it's an algorithm due to Lenaik Shiza, and it's called conic particle gradient descent. So what this algorithm very broadly amounts to do is to perform a gradient descent. So basically it's an iterative algorithm. You initialize it with a measure with a lot of atoms covering, in some sense, your domain. And you perform a gradient descent on this, so F would be the objective of the Berling-Lasso. You perform a gradient descent on this function here with a weird parametrization and with a weird metric on the parameter space. And this non-convex gradient descent can actually be shown to converge to a global optimum of the Berling-Lasso program, and at the very end you obtain something which is close to your unknown measure. So that's it for a very brief, yeah. It's really complicated. I mean, first, I'm not an expert, and I think the picture is quite complicated. I think what his result tells is that you need to be basically his analysis is like twofold. First, he analyzes the dynamic of this non-convex gradient descent in a neighborhood, say, of the optimum. If you are like epsilon away from being optimal, how does this non-convex gradient descent behaves? So basically you get exponentially fast convergence toward the global optimum in this case. If you are, say, epsilon away from being optimal in objective value. But to reach this epsilon away optimal in objective value, you need some clever initialization, and basically that's where the curse of dimensionality comes into place. And I mean, from what I know, you can't really avoid indeed discretizing your domain at the beginning. But the position of the particles is really not discretized. They really move everywhere in the domain. It's just that basically the initial measure has to cover the whole domain for the guarantees to work. From what I know. Okay. Yeah, sure. Sorry? Yeah. So this one is completely yeah. This one is like it's really a straightforward application of the Frank-Wolf algorithm in the space of measures. So you get convergence rates, etc. The hidden complexity is that this problem here is completely non-convex. Still, in imaging, it's a non-convex problem in dimension 2, 3, 4. Eta being super smooth, usually. So it's not so hard to solve it. And you can also still get convergence guarantees. You don't break convergence guarantees if you approximately solve this problem. But yeah, you have a... This is a... I mean, yeah. This is almost a provably convergent algorithm for the problem. And here, there is a... I think that this paper is... I mean, there are a set of papers actually on this. This one is called Sparse Optimization on the Space of Measures, I think. And I think there are many things in this paper. And to me, the most new part is really the analysis of the influence of the parametrization and on the metric you place on the space of parameters on the dynamic of the gradient descent. But yeah, I can't really tell much more because I'm really far from being a... Okay, so I just would like to very briefly, now that I presented my this grid-free sparse estimation problem, present you what I did in my PhD thesis. And what I did is actually related to another kind of regularization. So we've seen that the L1 norm is suited to recover discrete, sparse vectors, sorry, and the total variation of measures is suited to recover discrete measures. Well, in my PhD thesis, I looked at another kind of regularization, which is the total gradient variation. And this is a joint work with my two PhD advisors. So very super quickly, in imaging, there are lots of situations in which you could be interested in modeling your images as piecewise constant functions, linear combinations of a few indicator functions of nice enough sets. Then you're led to consider this inverse problem, trying to recover a piecewise constant image from noisy linear measurements, possibly noisy linear measurements. So here, the image is a real valued function on the plane, square integral for technical reasons, but it does not really, it's not really super important. And your measurement, again, live in some Hilbert space H, usually the Euclidean space of dimension m if you have access to m measurements. And basically, computing your observation just amounts to integrate U0, your unknown function or image, against an h-valued function phi. So this, for example, I computed it by convoluting this function with a Gaussian kernel, so blurring the function, and then sampling the result of this convolution on some discrete grid. So this is like some finite set of observations. You could be interested in trying to recover this image from this one. Imagine that you have like a microscope and that you're looking at super tiny structures such as cells. You will typically end up of this because of the resolution limit of your microscope, and you could want to try to recover the accurate location of the cells. So again, to do this, you can rely on the same strategy that we saw for the L1 norm and then the total variation of measures. And you could try to minimize some well-chosen criterion to recover your unknown function. And it turns out that here, if you want to promote minimizers that are piecewise constant functions. The good criterion to minimize the total gradient variation, which for smooth function is just the L1 norm of the gradient, but you can define it in a weak sense for any locally integral function. And in some sense, this penalization, it forces some sparsity on the gradient, which yields minimizers that are piecewise constant. So sums of a few indicator functions of nice enough sets. And again, you have this generalization of the lasso and the Berling lasso that you can solve. So I'm almost at the end of the presentation. So let me just say that you can basically try to answer the same questions as as I mentioned before for the grid-free sparse estimation problem. And the two questions I focused on during my thesis were these two ones, the question of noise robustness and the question of giving numerical methods for actually solving this generalized lasso problem. And concerning noise robustness, what we proved is an analog of the exact support recovery result of Duval and Perret, which basically tells you that under suitable assumptions, in the low noise regime, solving the generalized lasso problem will allow you to get some approximation of your unknown image, which has the same number of shapes as the unknown image. And the shapes appearing in the reconstructions, they will converge smoothly toward the limit shapes, as well as the colors appearing in the image. So there's a lot hidden between these results, but essentially that's what it tells. And concerning numerical methods for solving this problem here, this generalized lasso, what I would just say is that, again, since this problem is infinite dimensional, what most existing approaches consist in doing is just looking for an approximate minimizer which is piecewise constant on some fixed spatial discretization of the domain, typically a pixel grid. And in this way, you can basically fall back on some convex finite dimensional optimization problem for which there are, non-smooth convex optimization problem, but you still have very efficient solvers for solving it. The only problem with this approach is that since we are especially interested in recovering minimizers that are very simple functions, very simple piecewise constant functions, this representation for such functions is highly inefficient. If you want to recover the indicator function of a disk using by encoding its values on some pixel grid, basically the one object which really interests you is the edge set of your image, the boundary of this disk. And in some sense, you store a lot of values that are completely useless to faithfully account for this circle here. So the philosophy of what we did is on the opposite, to directly discretize the boundaries of the simple sets appearing in our images, and to come up. So we came up with an iterative algorithm which constructs iterates that are linear combinations of indicator functions of simple polygons. So that's our way to produce approximate solutions of the problem P lambda. And so this algorithm is provably convergent. It's based on the Frank-Wolf algorithm. As I said, its iterates are linear combinations of indicator functions of simple sets, which is the structure we know some solutions of our problem P lambda have. And just to give you an idea of what it yields in this setting where you want to recover this image from these noisy linear measurements, you initialize with the zero function. First iteration, you basically to know which shape to add in your image, you solve some shape optimization problem, some geometric variational problem, which depends on the previous iterate and the observations you have at your disposal. So first iteration, you get this shape here. There is a step at the end of each iteration in which we refine all the parameters. So the way I'm describing it seems really heuristic, but it's a provably convergence algorithm, etc. But still, we refine all the parameters of our image and end up with this image here. Then second iteration, we solve a new shape optimization problem to get this shape here, refine all the parameters. Third iteration, we get this blue set here, refine all the parameters, and in 3 iterations, we are allowed to obtain some really faithful approximation of the unknown image, and more importantly, this approximation of the unknown image, it is really structure preserving, in the sense that our unknown image was the sum, the linear combination of 3 indicator functions, and here we have an approximation which is a linear combination of 3 indicator functions of simple polygons. And you can see that we really faithfully recover the edge set of the image. And with this, I thank you for your attention. So basically the algorithm, maybe I have, oh yeah, actually I had a slide with more details. So this algorithm, it's a slightly modified application of Frank-Wolf algorithm to the Berling, to the generalized lasso problem. So basically, this problem it's convex. It's infinite dimensional, but it's convex. So you get a convergence rate, convergence guarantees, which are really the standard guarantees for your Frank-Wolf algorithm. The only thing is that this algorithm is in some sense theoretical. You assume that you can at least approximately solve this shape optimization problem here, and usually that's the part which is difficult. And basically, what we did is to rely on some previous works that allowed you to solve this optimization problem with provable reconstruction errors, say. And but still, you get, at least looking at this theoretical algorithm here, you get really a convergence algorithm. The only part that you have to be aware of is that this step here is, in some sense, some non-convex optimization step that you still have to solve approximately. I don't know if this really answers your question. It's a bit like, yeah, it might sound weird for people doing optimization, having an optimization algorithm in which you have sub-problems to solve, which are already non-convex optimization problems. But still, this one, I can still prove that I have some algorithm for approximating its solution with arbitrary precision. And so in some sense, sorry, you get an algorithm within the algorithm, but this procedure, at least this theoretical procedure, provably converges at a rate 1/k, which is not super good, but. When you have positivity assumptions on the, yeah. So maybe the case you could be interested in, for example, is the case where you replace this this with the. Okay, so basically in higher dimension, it's a bit more complicated. There are some measurement operators for which you will not have this property. But if your measurement operator is well behaved, for example, if it's the convolution with a Gaussian kernel, if you observe the full convolution of your measure with a Gaussian kernel, it has been shown, at least there are numerical evidence, that you will also have this property here. So the good reference to look at is a paper by to look for higher dimensional extension of this result is a paper by Clary Spoon and Gabriel Perret, which is called, multi-dimensional sparse super resolution. Should be 2017 maybe, or. But it's really non-trivial. The good thing is that they define some kind of proxy that you can numerically compute some function, let's say, and looking at the behavior of this function allows you to certify whether you can have expect this property to hold or not. Yeah. No. No, basically so this. Sorry. When to stop. Okay, so the algorithm gives you, you have a convergence rate, so you could just like wait, you have a convergence rate in terms of objective value, it's 1/k, so you could just, if you want to reach precision accuracy epsilon, you could just wait for some time reaching this. But this algorithm is actually endowed with the natural stopping criterion. In some sense, this function eta k that you see here, it's related to being a candidate solution for the dual of the problem of p lambda. So this function eta k is basically never going to be admissible for the dual problem, and as soon as it is admissible, you are optimal and you can stop. So what you can do, for example, is wait for this at each iteration. Basically, the objective the value of this problem here, when you compute it, it gives you in a way a measure of how far this function eta k is from being admissible for the dual problem. And then if you slightly modify this function eta k, you get some admissible problem for the dual, and can certify that the duality gap is below some threshold epsilon. So you can certify that you are epsilon away from being a solution. So in some sense, you have a natural stopping criterion with this algorithm. Yes, maybe here. Also, yeah. Yes, so what we do is that we've got this theoretical algorithm here, and what we do is that instead of solving accurately this problem, we approximate its solution with some polygon with a large number, possibly large number of vertices. And indeed, in this refinement step, and let's say during the optimization here, we indeed have some iterative procedure that moves the vertices of the polygon along what is called a shape gradient. So I might have if you want, I have an illustration somewhere, but okay, yeah, well, I'll just get back there. But yeah, it really corresponds to iteratively moving the vertices. Yeah. It's exactly this. So we didn't want to. So Level-Set's method could allow us to circumvent lots of issues in this this algorithm, but we didn't want to use it because in some sense, when you do shape optimization with the Level-Set method, you still have some fixed grid hidden somewhere, and we did not really want to go that way. But it's really debatable, I think, this choice we made.